Any military company cannot do without priestesses of love. After all, there are many men at war. Even in combat conditions, men sometimes need relaxation, and the best detente for a man is, of course, a woman. The Nazis, having come to power in Germany in 1933, initially presented themselves as fighters for morality. However, this did not last long. The fascist leaders quickly realized that male weaknesses could be effectively used for their own purposes. Whoever controls the intimate life of the army and officials has undeniable influence on the executors of power and their decisions. From the mid-30s, the Nazis began to take all free love under their vigilant control. At first, this was done unofficially, but soon it reached the state level. At first, brothels were created directly on German territory. Only German women could work in them. The so-called Division of Joy was originally intended to satisfy soldiers and officers of the Wehrmacht and SS. However, with the beginning of the wars of conquest, stationary brothels in Germany could no longer satisfy the growing demands of the multi-million army, which was in constant motion and moved far away from its native fatherland army. In this regard, in September 1939, Himmler's deputy SS Gruppenführer Reinhard Heydrich issued an order for the construction of field brothels, specifically for the needs of the moving army, as well as stationary houses of tolerance in the occupied territories. A year later, in September 1940, the chief stationary doctor of the General Government, formerly Poland, reported on the opening of brothels in all major cities of Poland. It should be understood that at that time, the city with a population of more than 100,000 was already considered quite large. The leaders of the Reich approached the organization of leisure for the Wehrmacht and SS troops with all seriousness. The process of creating and controlling brothels was supervised by Reichsfuhrer SS Heinrich Himmler himself. In fact, he was the main pimp of Germany. Army brothels solved several problems at once. First, they made it possible to control the mentality and attitude of personnel and officers. Secondly, they significantly reduced the risk of the spread of venereal diseases among the military. Thirdly, they made it possible to better preserve military secrets, since officers, surgeons, or privates under the influence of wine and female affection could chat about something unauthorized. And since the brothels were under the vigilant control of the SD and the Gestapo, and many of the ladies were recruited by the German secret services, valuable information rarely left the brothel. However, there were still problems with the latter on the territories of the USSR and Poland, because Soviet and Polish patriots, even forced to sleep with the Germans, continued to hate them and passed on the overheard information to the partisans and underground fighters. Finally, the fourth reason was control over the mentality of the Wehrmacht and SS troops themselves. Therefore, the Reich leadership paid great attention to military brothels. However, by the year 40, there were clearly not enough German and Western European women for all the fascist brothels. The deficit began to be filled with representatives of the local concrete population of the occupied territories. At the same time, they did not stand on ceremony with the population of the countries of Eastern Europe, Poland, Czech Republic, Yugoslavia, Greece, and the USSR. Some women went to work in brothels out of necessity, from hunger, artificially caused by the Germans who expropriated all food supplies from the occupied territories for the needs of the army in Germany. Some went either at will or on instruction from the underground resistance forces, but they were a minority. Many were forced into prostitution by the Nazis, under the threat of deportation to Germany, removal of children, and other despicable methods. From the materials of the Nuremberg trials, during the occupation, the German police regularly staged raids in various cities to forcefully capture as many young women as possible, who were then forced to work in brothels for German soldiers and officers. Both in fields and stationary brothels, a strict plan and strict discipline were established. Everything was calculated. How many officers a lady should serve per day, how many sergeant majors, surgeons, and how many soldiers. Failure to comply with the plan resulted in punishment, deprivation of days off and personal time. Girls of non-Aryan origin could also be subjected to physical violence. The position of the girls also depended on their national origin and social status. Thus, for German women and representatives of related nations, plans were much lower, and the condition of stay in a brothel were incomparably better. All German prostitutes received a stable salary, plus a percentage of fees from clients. Women of other origins were deprived of such privileges. In addition, as already noted, many were forced working in brothels. They of course also received some money, but this was often of a formal nature. As a rule, brothel bosses could steal and appropriate money from such women, and many of such women had to support children or elderly parents. The German authorities did not limit themselves only to army brothels. On Himmler's order, from 1942 onwards, brothels began to be established in concentration camps as well. According to the plans of the Nazi commanders, women in camp brothels were supposed to serve local collaborators, activists loyal to the camp authorities, and local police as an incentive. However, camp girls were also used by German concentration camp employees, guards, and even officers. Conditions of women who worked in camp brothels were even more difficult than in the army. However, compared to other prisoners, their situation was much easier. Attractive and simply young girls and women were enrolled in a camp brothel, sewn with black fabric squares or triangles on their clothes and given a plan to follow 20 clients a day. In practice, women in concentration camp brothels became slaves for camp guards, police, and local activists loyal to the Nazis. For their somewhat privileged position in comparison with other prisoners, they had to pay with moral cost and women's health. The fact is that the Nazis sterilized all the girls assigned to the camp brothel, except for the Germans, who could only be used by the Germans. Those women who lived to see liberation could no longer have children. Intimacy with girls from a brothel in a concentration camp cost only 2 marks. A pack of decent cigarettes cost 3 marks. All girls underwent strict medical control. For any serious illness, a girl could be sent to a common barracks and common work, or into a gas chamber. For many women, this terrible fate of being a camp prostitute became salvation and an opportunity to survive in this hell. We hardly have the right to condemn them for this. Thus, we're dealing with a well-functioning system of satisfying the army of conquerors of Europe. In essence, it was a huge entertainment industry for representatives of the Nazi and their satellites, and at the same time an instrument of control and manipulation in the hands of the intelligence services and the leaders of the Third Reich. The fate of the women who survived all this hell was not easy. There is no pity for those who did this voluntarily, not under threat of the occupation authorities or starvation, but for the sake of an easy and carefree life. But many were engaged in such a shameful craft under duress or due to difficult circumstances. The fate of children born from contacts with Germans was especially difficult. In the USSR, women whom local residents pointed out as having collaborated with the Nazis had their children taken away and sent to orphanages. There they were given new surnames, and growing up they became ordinary Soviet citizens. The women were imprisoned or sent into exile depending on the severity of the charges, but the majority got off with settlements or remained to live in their areas. The children were left with them since they did not provide any services other than the sexual services to the fascists, so the Soviet government did not ask much of them. They received condemnation only from their fellow countrymen and neighbors who could exert moral pressure on them. The situation was somewhat different in Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, as well as in Western European countries. Here, women who cohabitated with the Nazis or engaged in prostitution with the Germans were treated much harsher. They were persecuted, subjected to public disgrace. They were stripped and paraded naked through the streets of villages and cities. Their heads were shaved, swastikas were drawn on their bodies or foreheads. They were spat on, people threw earth at them and doused them with slop. The children of such women in Europe for a long time bore the stigma of fascist bastards and were subjected to psychological pressure and sometimes physical violence from their peers on the street and at school. This is the nature of war. Traitors are never loved anywhere, even if this betrayal was very conditional and was only of the nature of intimacy. The Nazis ruined the lives and destinies of not only their victims and those who actively fought against them, but also those who were loyal to them and tried to get along with their power. In a word, they made it worse both for the enemies, fighters against fascism, and their friends or simply loyal citizens of the occupied countries. The women who served the fascist army paid their price for it.